The thing that terrified German soldiers most in World War II wasn't the roar of bombers painting the sky with fire. It wasn't the thunder of Sherman tanks grinding through the bocage. It wasn't even the screaming descent of artillery shells that turned Earth into erupting volcanoes of steel and dirt. It was silence. Normandy summer 1944. The air hangs thick with dust
Move
and the
out! Keep
cloying
formation!
sweetness of cider
Copy,
apples
moving up!
rotting in the
Watch
July
the
heat. It has
flanks!
been weeks since D-Day, and the initial momentum of the invasion has slowed to a brutal crawl through the hedgerows. The bocage, ancient stone walls and dense vegetation that turn every field into a fortress, every lane into a killing ground. A squad from the 12th SS Panzer Division moves with cautious precision along a sunken road. These are not green conscripts, fresh from training depots. These are hardened survivors who have endured the frozen hell of the Eastern Front, who have weathered the thunderous British artillery barrages that shook the earth like the wrath of God himself. They know the sounds of war intimately, the distinctive shriek of a diving Typhoon fighter, the heavy rumble of tank treads chewing through mud, the sharp crack of a Panzerfaust igniting. Noise announces death. Noise gives you a chance to run, to duck, to pray. But here in this narrow lane, choked with summer vegetation, there is only the whisper of wind through poplar leaves. The birds fled weeks ago. Even the insects seem to have abandoned this stretch of French countryside. The pointman, a corporal named Heinrich, with tired eyes that have seen too much, pauses to adjust his helmet. His fingers tremble slightly. Not from fear, he tells himself, from fatigue, from the weight of weeks without proper sleep. He scans the tree line 300 yards distant. Nothing moves. No unnatural shapes, no glint of metal catching the afternoon sun, no telltale muzzle flash. He turns back to signal his squad forward. In that fraction of a second, his world ends. His head snaps back violently, and he crumples into the dirt like a marionette with severed strings. There was no crack of a rifle, no smoke drifting from the distant hedgerow, just sudden, inexplicable death. Panic spreads through the remaining soldiers like wildfire through dry grass. They scramble for the shallow ditch, pressing their bodies into the earth as if they could burrow to safety. Fingers grip rifles with white-knuckle desperation, but there is nothing to shoot at. No target, no enemy, just the empty landscape and the corpse of their comrade bleeding into French soil. One of the young privates, his hands shaking so badly he can barely hold his Kar 98K, whispers the words that have circulated through Wehrmacht ranks like a contagious disease since the landings in Sicily. Kanadischer Schütze, Canadian sniper, 800 yards away, concealed beneath a carefully constructed ghillie suit woven from local vegetation burlap, and 3 hours of patient preparation. Corporal William Mackenzie exhales slowly. His eye never leaves the scope of his Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark 1T. The telescopic sight offers a clear 3.5 power magnification of the chaos he has just created. He watches the remaining Germans huddle in the ditch, watches them scan uselessly for a threat they cannot see, watches fear do its work. 47. The number appears in his mind unbidden. 47 confirmed kills since landing in Sicily 14 months ago. 47 men who woke up that morning thinking they might survive another day. Billy whispers the count to himself. He wonders when he will stop counting. 3 miles to the southeast, in a different sector of the same nightmare landscape, another Canadian sniper watches a different German unit through his own scope. Private Thomas Borden, 20 years old and already credited with 62 confirmed kills in just 6 months of frontline operations, has been tracking this squad for over an hour. Tommy's ghillie suit is even more elaborate than Billy's, layered with fresh-cut vegetation that he replaces every few hours to match the specific terrain. He has been lying motionless in the same position for 4 hours, ignoring the cramping in his legs, the insects crawling across his neck, the urgent need to urinate. He has already killed 3 soldiers from this unit this morning. Clean shots, quick deaths. But the German officer coordinating the machine gun nest, 200 yards behind the squad's current position, still lives. Tommy has had 6 opportunities to take the shot. 6 perfect moments when the officer stood exposed, binoculars raised, directing his men with hand signals. Tommy let him live each time. Not from mercy, not from hesitation, but because when the officer dies, this hunt ends, and Tommy has come to understand something dark about himself in these months of killing. The hunt is the only time he feels truly alive, the moment between identifying the target and squeezing the trigger, that suspended instant when he holds absolute power over another human life. He should take the shot. His training demands it, his orders require it, but his finger rests motionless on the trigger guard, and he watches and he waits. The German officer finally moves behind cover. The moment passes. Tommy will have to wait for another opportunity. He feels something that might be relief or might be disappointment. He has stopped being able to tell the difference. A Canadian forward observer monitoring radio traffic from both sniper teams realizes what has happened. 2 separate kills on the same German unit within minutes of each other, overlapping fields of fire. The mathematics of effective sniper deployment suggest these teams should be coordinating, not competing for the same targets. Orders crackle through the radio. Both snipers are to extract from their positions and rendezvous at the Canadian forward position. They will be reassigned, working together now, not separately. Billy receives the order with quiet acceptance. He begins the slow, methodical process of withdrawing from his hide. Every movement calculated, every shift of weight tested before committed. It takes him 40 minutes to crawl 30 yards to the relative safety of a destroyed farmhouse. Tommy receives the same order and feels something twist in his chest. The hunt interrupted, but orders are orders, and disobedience is not in his nature. Only the killing is in his nature now. They meet 3 hours later at a ruined barn that serves as the forward position for the Calgary Highlanders sniper section. Billy arrives first, his ghillie suit carefully removed and folded, his rifle meticulously cleaned. Despite having fired only a single round, he looks thin, almost gaunt. His eyes carry a quality that other soldiers have begun to notice. Tommy arrives 20 minutes later. He moves with a fluid, predatory grace that seems unnatural in a man who has been lying in mud for half a day. His eyes are sharp alert, scanning the environment with constant assessment, looking for threats, looking for targets, always looking. They regard each other in the fading afternoon light. Both are covered in dirt and camouflage paint. Both carry the same rifle. Both have become experts in the same terrible trade, but anyone watching would see immediately that these are not the same type of man. Billy extends his hand. Corporal William Mackenzie. Most people call me Billy, Calgary Highlanders. Tommy shakes it. His grip is firm, almost aggressive. Private Thomas Borden, Tommy, 3rd Division. How many you got? The question comes from Tommy casual, as asking about the weather. Billy hesitates. I don't really keep count. Bullshit. Everyone counts. Can't help it. A long silence stretches between them. Finally, Billy answers. 47, since Sicily. Tommy nods. 62, since Normandy. You're steady. I'm fast. Another silence, this one heavier. You count them to remember. Billy's voice is quiet. I count them because I want to remember every single one. Tommy's response is immediate, almost defiant. They earned that, being remembered. Billy searches Tommy's face for something. Remorse, perhaps. Doubt. Any sign of the weight that crushes Billy's chest every night when he tries to sleep. He finds nothing but a strange intensity, an almost feverish energy. We're being paired up, Billy says finally. Special assignment. I heard. German counter-sniper. Been raising hell for 3 days. Several of ours confirmed killed. Intelligence says he's operating out of a church tower, village of St. Laurent, 2 kilometers northeast. Tommy's eyes light up with something Billy finds unsettling. Hunter hunting a hunter. About time this got interesting. The briefing is held in a cellar that still smells of wine from bottles shattered by artillery weeks ago. A captain from intelligence spreads reconnaissance photographs across a makeshift table. The church tower rises above the village like a broken finger pointing at heaven. Pattern analysis suggests he changes position every 6 to 8 hours, the captain explains, but he always returns to this tower. It gives him a 360-degree field of fire over our approach routes. Our armor can't advance until he's neutralized. Billy studies the photographs. Any idea who he is? The captain shakes his head. Prisoner interrogations suggest he's young, possibly Hitler Youth pressed into service, and here's the concerning part. He slides another photograph forward. We recovered a spent casing from one of the kill sites. British 303. Tommy leans forward. He's using one of ours, a Lee Enfield, captured from a patrol that got overrun last week, which means he might know our tactics. This isn't some conscript with a hunting rifle. The implications settle over the room like a cold fog. They are being sent to kill someone who might be exactly like them. When do we move? Tommy asks. Tonight. Under cover of darkness, you'll infiltrate to within striking distance. Wait for dawn. 1 shot. Then immediate extraction. Artillery will provide covering fire for your withdrawal. Billy looks at the photographs again. The church tower, the village, the narrow streets that will be filled with German troops. The 800-yard approach across completely open ground. This is a one-way mission if anything goes wrong. That the captain meets his eyes. That nothing about this war has ever been safe, Corporal, but if you don't take him out, he'll kill more of ours. Your choice. But it isn't really a choice, not for men who have already committed to being the ones who do the terrible necessary things. We'll do it, Billy says quietly. Tommy just smiles. They spend the next 3 hours in preparation. It is a ritual both have performed dozens of times, but never together. Billy works with methodical precision, checking every piece of equipment twice. He removes all reflective surfaces, tapes down anything that might rattle, loads his magazine with match-grade ammunition that has been hand-selected for consistency. Tommy works faster with a kind of manic energy. His ghillie suit is a work of art layered with materials he has collected over weeks. Canvas strips, burlap sacking, netting salvaged from fishing boats. He adjusts it constantly, never satisfied, always seeking perfect camouflage. You pray, Tommy asks suddenly. Billy looks up from cleaning his scope lens. Sometimes, you used to, before. Tommy doesn't elaborate on what before means. Before the killing started, before he discovered what he was good at. What stopped you? Tommy pauses, considering. Felt like lying. Asking God to forgive what I was about to do again tomorrow seemed dishonest. Billy has no response to that. He returns to his preparations. As twilight settles over the shattered landscape, they apply camouflage paint to their faces and hands, dark greens and browns that break up the human features that are so easily recognized. They become shapes, shadows, something other than men. A young lieutenant watches them transform. "You two really going out there alone against a sniper who's already killed several of our best?" Tommy answers without looking up. "That's why they send two of us." "Odds. What if you both get killed?" Now Tommy does look up and his smile is cold. "Then you better send someone better." They move out at 10 p.m. under a moonless sky. The cloud cover is perfect, thick enough to obscure starlight, but not so heavy that rain threatens. Rain would make the stalk easier in some ways, but would affect ballistics at long range. They need conditions to be perfect for the morning shot. The first kilometer is through friendly territory, Canadian and British positions dug into the hedgerows. Soldiers watch them pass with mixture of respect and pity. Everyone knows what the snipers do. Everyone is grateful it isn't them doing it. The second kilometer is no man's land. Cratered earth and destroyed farmland. Bodies lie unrecovered in shell holes, already bloating in the summer heat. The smell is overwhelming. Billy breathes through his mouth and tries not to think about the fact that some of these bodies might be German soldiers he killed in previous engagements. The final 800 yards to the village edge is pure exposure. Open fields that would be instantly fatal to cross in daylight. Even now in darkness, German patrols sweep the area regularly. Machine gun positions cover every approach with interlocking fields of fire. Billy and Tommy drop to their bellies and begin to crawl. The human body is not designed for this kind of movement. Elbows and knees drag you forward inches at a time. Hip flexors scream in protest. The weight of the rifle, the ammunition, the equipment, all of it presses down. Gravity becomes an enemy. They move in silence. Complete, absolute silence. A single snapped twig could bring a flare arcing into the sky, exposing them like insects pinned to a display board. A cough could mean death. Even breathing must be controlled, measured, silent. It takes them 6 hours to cover 800 yards. Billy's mind goes to strange places during the crawl. He thinks about Cape Breton, about the forests of his childhood where his father taught him to hunt deer, about the ethics of hunting, the respect for the animal, the clean kill. His father's words echo through his memory. A good hunter never takes pleasure in the kill. He respects what gives him life. But these men he kills give him nothing. They threaten everything he values. Does that change the ethics? Does war transform murder into virtue? 3 feet away. Tommy's mind is occupied with different thoughts. Angles, wind speed, the slight variation in zero that happens when a rifle barrel heats from multiple shots, the church tower and how many firing positions it might offer, whether the German sniper will appear at dawn or wait for full light. They reach the village outskirts at 4 a.m. German sentries are 30 yards away, visible as dark shapes against darker buildings. The enemy soldiers are smoking cigarettes, the glowing tips like tiny beacons in the darkness. They speak in low voices, talking about home, about girls, about anything except the killing. Billy and Tommy are close enough to hear every word, though neither speaks German well enough to understand much. It doesn't matter. The tone is universal. Young men far from home, scared, tired, wanting the war to end. Billy thinks about the shot he will take in a few hours. One of these men joking with his friends might be dead by breakfast. Killed by an enemy they never saw, never heard, never had a chance to fight. Tommy thinks about the church tower and whether he can angle a shot through the window without exposing his position. Professional concerns, technical problems to solve. They low crawl the final 200 yards to a destroyed barn that gives them sightlines to the church. It takes another hour by the time they settle into position tucked behind rubble that provides both concealment and cover. Billy's arms are shaking with fatigue. His ghillie suit is soaked with dew and sweat. Every muscle in his body is cramping. Tommy looks like he could go another 6 hours. His eyes are bright alert, scanning the church tower through his scope. "Good position," he whispers. "We've got overlapping angles. If he appears in the east window, you take it. West window, I've got it. Center window, closest shooter calls it." Billy nods. His throat is too dry to speak. "You ever think about what happens after?" Billy asks quietly. "After what? After the war, when we go home, when we're not doing this anymore?" Tommy is silent for a long moment. "No," he finally says. "I don't think about after. This is all there is." Dawn comes slowly to Normandy. The sky lightens from black to gray to pale blue. Details emerge from darkness. The church tower takes shape, its damaged spire reaching toward heaven like a prayer from a burning world. 6 a.m., German soldiers begin to move in the village below. Morning routines, sentries changing shifts, the small rituals of military life that continue even in the middle of hell. 7 a.m., still no movement in the church tower. 8 a.m., a shape appears briefly in the western window, too fast to acquire, too fast to identify. Both Canadian snipers tense, but the target vanishes before either can fire. 9 a.m. The sun is fully up now, burning through the morning haze. Heat begins to shimmer off stone surfaces. Long-range shooting will become more difficult as the day progresses, atmospheric distortion affecting bullet trajectory. 9:30 a.m. The shape appears again. Eastern window, Billy's angle. Through his scope, Billy sees a figure adjusting something, the glint of glass. Another scope, the German sniper setting up for his own day of hunting. I've got him, Billy breathes. His finger moves to the trigger. Wait, Tommy's voice is urgent. Something's wrong. What? The way he's moving. Too casual, too exposed. Billy keeps his crosshairs steady on the target. The German shifts again, and for just a moment his profile is clear in the scope. Young, very young, almost childlike in the proportions of his face. He doesn't know we're here, Billy whispers. He thinks he's safe. Or it's bait, Tommy counters, setting up a decoy while the real shooter is somewhere else. They wait. Seconds stretch into minutes. The German in the tower settles into position, rifle resting on the window ledge. He is scanning the Canadian lines with his scope, hunting for targets, completely unaware that he has become the prey. Take the shot, Tommy says, before he sees us. Billy's finger tightens on the trigger. The breathing technique his father taught him 20 years ago for hunting deer. Slow inhale, partial exhale, hold. Squeeze. The Lee Enfield barks once, a sharp crack that echoes across the village. 800 yards away, the German sniper's head snaps back. His rifle falls from the window. A moment later, his body follows tumbling from the tower. Instantly, the village erupts in chaos. German soldiers scrambling for cover, shouts in harsh German, machine gun fire raking the barn where Billy and Tommy hide, but the Germans are firing blind, desperate, terrified. Extraction! Tommy shouts. They are already moving, crawling backward as prearranged Canadian artillery begins to fall on pre-planned coordinates. Explosions walk across the German positions. Smoke and dust create a curtain between the snipers and the enemy. They crawl, they run when they can. They throw themselves into shell craters when German machine gun fire gets too close. Billy's lungs burn, his legs feel like lead, but he runs because stopping means death. 200 yards from Canadian lines, Tommy tackles Billy into a ditch. Down, a German artillery shell lands where they were standing 2 seconds before. The shockwave passes over them like a physical blow. Dirt and shrapnel rain down. Billy's ears ring so loudly he cannot hear Tommy shouting at him. They reach Canadian lines 40 minutes later, covered in mud, bleeding from minor shrapnel wounds but alive. The soldiers in the forward position cheer as they stumble through the wire. Another enemy sniper eliminated, another threat removed, another small victory in an endless war of small victories. The captain from intelligence meets them at the aid station where medics check their wounds. Confirmed kill. The tower is clear. Our armor can advance. Good work. Billy says nothing. He is staring at his hands. They will not stop shaking. Tommy is already cleaning his rifle, methodical and focused. When's the next mission? He asks. That evening, after the medics have patched them up and sent them back to their unit, Billy and Tommy sit in the ruins of a farmhouse that serves as their temporary billet. The sun sets in violent shades of orange and red. We should go verify, Billy says suddenly. Verify what the kill. See who he was. Tommy looks at him sharply. Why dead is dead? I need to know. Something in Billy's voice makes Tommy relent. They return to the village under cover of darkness. Canadian infantry now holds the town, having advanced through the gap created by the sniper's elimination. The Germans have retreated to new defensive positions further inland. The church tower is accessible now. They climb the narrow stairs, their boots crunching on rubble and spent shell casings. The smell of cordite and death fills the confined space. The German sniper's body lies where it fell, partially covered by a threadbare blanket that some Canadian soldier threw over it. Billy pulls back the blanket. The face staring up at him is barely 18 years old. Smooth cheeks that have never needed a razor. Eyes still open, their blue depths already clouding. On his collar, the insignia of the Hitler Youth, a conscript, a boy playing at being a soldier. The Lee Enfield lies beside him. British 303. Captured weapon, but poorly maintained. The boy clearly did not know how to care for it properly. The scope mounting is loose, the barrel fouled from lack of cleaning. He wasn't trained, Billy says, his voice hollow. He was just a kid with a rifle he didn't understand. Tommy studies the body without emotion. He killed several of ours. With luck, not skill. Look at this. Billy points to the scope. He didn't even know how to properly zero it. He was just shooting and hoping. And now he's dead and some of ours are avenged. That's how war works. Billy looks at his partner, searching for some sign of the humanity that must exist beneath the cold efficiency. Does any of this bother you at all? Tommy meets his eyes. The silence stretches between them, heavy with unspoken truths. It used to, Tommy finally says, but that's the difference between us, Billy. You're trying not to become a monster. I already am one, and I've stopped fighting it. Makes the job easier. That night, Billy cannot sleep. He lies in his bedroll, staring at the ceiling of the ruined farmhouse and sees the boy's face every time he closes his eyes, the smooth cheeks, the surprise frozen in death, the resemblance to his own younger brother back in Nova Scotia. 300 yards away, Tommy sleeps soundly, his rifle within arm's reach, ready for the next hunt. 2 hunters, both Canadian, both efficient, both deadly. But somewhere in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the act of killing a boy who looked at death with surprise instead of understanding, their paths had begun to diverge. One man counting his kills and hating each addition to the tally, the other counting his kills and hungry for more. And in the terrible mathematics of war, that difference would matter more than any number of perfect shots, any amount of training, any level of skill, because the question is not whether you can kill. The question is whether you can kill and remain human. Billy Mackenzie was trying to answer that question. Tommy Borden had already stopped asking it. 2 weeks after the church tower, Billy Mackenzie requested a transfer. The paperwork sat on his company commander's desk for 3 days before being stamped with a single word in red ink, denied. The Canadian Army did not transfer its most effective snipers, simply because those snipers were having trouble sleeping. The war did not care about troubled consciences, it only cared about results. Billy's results were impeccable. 53 confirmed kills now, each one documented, each one verified, clean shots, professional work, exactly what his training had prepared him to deliver. But the number felt heavier now, not just a count, but a weight. Tommy Borden had no such troubles. His count had reached 74, and he slept like a man without burdens. When Billy mentioned the denied transfer request, Tommy had simply shrugged and cleaned his rifle with meticulous care. Their partnership continued because the Canadian Army's logistics were brutally simple. You paired your best hunters together and pointed them at the enemy. Everything else was secondary to effectiveness, and together Billy and Tommy were devastatingly effective. August 1944, Operation Totalize. The Canadian First Army pushing south toward Falaise, attempting to close the pocket that would trap the entire German Seventh Army. The offensive began with night bombing, with armored columns grinding forward through darkness, with infantry clinging to tanks as they advanced through fields that had become abattoirs. And ahead of it all, invisible in the pre-dawn darkness, the snipers moved into position. Billy and Tommy were assigned to create what the tactical manuals called a dead zone, a 1,000-yard radius of absolute control where any German soldier who showed himself would die before he understood what killed him. The purpose was surgical and cruel: eliminate the German command structure before the main Canadian assault arrived, remove the officers, the NCOs, the radio men, the forward observers, turn an organized defense into a panicked rabble. They established their hide in the shattered remains of a stone barn overlooking a crossroads that intelligence indicated was critical to German defensive coordination. The approach had taken them 8 hours, crawling through fields of wheat that provided concealment but no cover. If the Germans had launched a random artillery barrage during that crawl, Billy and Tommy would have been atomized without ever firing a shot. But they had made it. They were in position. And as the sun rose over Normandy on the second day of Operation Totalize, they began their work. The first target appeared at 6:15 in the morning. A German Hauptmann, a captain standing beside a Kubelwagen and pointing at a map spread across the vehicle's hood. 3 other officers clustered around him, clearly receiving orders for the day's defensive operations. The range was 620 yards. The wind was negligible. The morning air was still cool enough that heat shimmer would not distort the shot. Tommy had the angle. Officer by the vehicle, center mass. Taking the shot, the Lee Enfield's report was sharp and final. Through his own scope positioned 50 yards from Tommy, Billy watched the Hauptmann drop. The other officers scattered, diving for cover, shouting orders that Billy could not hear but could imagine. Confusion, fear, the immediate knowledge that death was watching them. Billy tracked the next target, a senior NCO, trying to organize soldiers into a defensive response. The German was good using the Kubelwagen for cover, only exposing himself for seconds at a time. But seconds were enough. Billy's shot took him high in the chest. The NCO crumpled behind the vehicle, his legs visible, twitching once before going still. Radio man, 200 yards left of the vehicle. Tommy's voice was calm, almost bored. Another shot, another body. They worked in rhythm now, a terrible dance choreographed by months of practice. Tommy took the moving targets, his reflexes and speed, allowing him to track soldiers sprinting between cover. Billy took the stationary targets, the patient ones, the careful ones who thought they were being smart by moving slowly. By 9 a.m., they had killed 11 Germans. Not 11 soldiers, 11 key personnel, 2 officers, 4 NCOs, 3 radio men, 2 machine gun crew leaders who were trying to set up defensive positions. The crossroads was paralyzed. German soldiers huddled behind vehicles and walls, terrified to move, unable to coordinate without their leadership. Some simply ran, abandoning their positions rather than face invisible death. Through his scope, Billy watched a young German private, maybe 19 years old, pressed against a wall. The boy was crying, tears streaming down his face as he gripped his rifle with shaking hands. He was not a threat. He was not a target of value. He was just a terrified kid who wanted to live through the next 5 minutes. Billy could kill him. One shot. The boy would never know what happened, but what would be the point? He posed no threat. His death would accomplish nothing except adding one more face to the collection that haunted Billy's nights. Clear shot on the private northwest wall. Tommy's voice crackled through the short-range radio they were using to coordinate. Negative, Billy responded. No value, not a threat. A pause. Then Tommy's voice colder now. Your call. 30 yards away, a German lieutenant made the fatal mistake of trying to restore order. He stood shouting commands, trying to rally his scattered men. Tommy's shot caught him mid-sentence. The lieutenant's words ended in a spray of red mist. The psychological effect was absolute. The remaining German soldiers broke. They abandoned the crossroads, entirely fleeing south without orders, without coordination, without discipline. A defensive position that should have held for hours fell in 90 minutes because the men holding it no longer had leaders and no longer had the courage to stay. When Canadian armor arrived 3 hours later, they found the crossroads littered with abandoned equipment and 12 bodies. No resistance, no fight, just the evidence of terror made manifest. That evening, the company commander shook Billy's hand and Tommy's hand and told them they had saved Canadian lives, possibly dozens of lives. The armor had rolled through without firing a shot, which meant tank crews went home to their families instead of burning to death in steel coffins. Billy nodded and said nothing. Tommy smiled and asked when the next mission would be. Later in their temporary billet in a captured German dugout that still smelled of Urzet's coffee and cheap tobacco, Tommy cleaned his rifle and spoke without looking at Billy. The kid against the wall, you could have taken him. He wasn't a threat. He was wearing a German uniform. That makes him a threat. Billy looked at his partner, this young man who had somehow become a machine optimized for killing. He was crying Tommy. He was broken. What's the point? The point is we're at war. The point is that crying kid might pick up a Panzerfaust tomorrow and kill a Canadian tank crew. The point is you don't get to choose which Germans deserve to die. They all do just for being here. Is that what you really believe? Tommy finally looked up from his rifle. His eyes held something that Billy was beginning to recognize as emptiness, not anger, not hate, just nothing. I believe we have a job. I believe I'm good at it. I believe everything else is just noise that makes the job harder. The conversation ended there because neither of them had anything else to say. They had reached the edge of some fundamental difference in how they understood what they were doing. 3 days later, they received new orders. Intelligence had identified a German supply convoy that was critical to the enemy's defensive operations in the Falaise sector. The convoy included ammunition, medical supplies, and senior officers being rotated to new positions. If the convoy could be disrupted, an entire German division would be weakened. But this mission came with specific instructions that made Billy's stomach turn. They were not to destroy the convoy. That would be too quick, too clean. Instead, they were to implement what the tactical manual euphemistically called a denial of aid operation. The briefing officer explained it with clinical detachment. Billy would wound the convoy commander, non-lethal but visibly painful. The commander's screams would draw medical personnel to his aid. Tommy would eliminate those medical personnel. The psychological impact on the remaining German soldiers would be devastating. They would learn that helping their wounded meant death. Unit cohesion would collapse. It was brutally effective. It was also the kind of warfare that violated every concept of honor that Billy had been raised with. You did not shoot medics. You did not use wounded men as bait. Even in war, there were supposed to be lines you did not cross. But orders were orders, and the officer making them clear that refusing would result in court-martial for disobeying lawful commands during wartime. The convoy would cost Canadian lives if allowed through. This method would stop it with minimal risk to Canadian forces. Tommy accepted the mission without hesitation. Billy accepted it because he could not find the words to refuse, even though every instinct screamed that this was wrong. They established position on a low ridge overlooking the road the convoy would use. The hide was cramped, forcing them to lie shoulder to shoulder in the August heat. Flies buzzed around them, attracted by the sweat and the smell of unwashed bodies. Neither man moved, neither man spoke. They simply waited with the patience of predators who have learned that stillness is its own weapon. The convoy appeared at 2:30 in the afternoon. 6 trucks, 2 Kubelwagons, approximately 40 German soldiers visible with more likely hidden in the covered truck beds. The convoy moved slowly, cautiously, drivers aware that this stretch of road was vulnerable to ambush. Through his scope, Billy identified the convoy commander, an Oberstleutnant, a lieutenant colonel, riding in the lead Kubelwagen. The officer was studying a map, one hand gesturing to the driver, clearly giving directions. He looked to be in his 40s, old for combat duty, probably a logistics specialist rather than a frontline fighter. Billy centered the crosshairs on the officer's right thigh. A wound there would be painful, would bleed impressively, but would not be immediately life-threatening if treated quickly. The femoral artery was slightly medial to his aim point, miss by 2 inches, and the officer would bleed out in minutes. The margin for error was razor thin. "Ready," Billy whispered into the radio. "Confirmed," Tommy responded. "I have eyes on medical personnel in the second truck." Billy's finger tightened on the trigger. He thought about his father, about hunting deer in the forests of Cape Breton, about the ethic of the clean kill, the quick death, the respect for the life you were taking. Everything he had been taught said this was wrong, but he was a soldier. He had orders, and 40 German soldiers on that convoy represented 40 men who would fight against Canadians in the days ahead. He fired. The officer screamed. The sound carried across the 200 yards between the ridge and the road, a high, agonized shriek that spoke of shattered bone and torn muscle. The officer fell from the Kubelwagen, clutching his leg, his face contorted in pain. Chaos erupted. Soldiers poured from the trucks. weapons ready, scanning for threats, but the ridge was too far away, too well camouflaged. They saw nothing. A medic jumped from the second truck, Red Cross armband clearly visible, medical bag in hand. He sprinted toward the wounded officer, driven by training and duty and the fundamental human impulse to help someone in pain. Tommy's shot took the medic in the head. The man dropped instantly, his medical bag spilling bandages and morphine syrettes across the dusty road. A second medic started to move forward, stopped. The man was frozen, caught between duty and self-preservation. His eyes swept the landscape, trying to find the shooter, trying to calculate whether he would die if he tried to help. The wounded officer was still screaming, begging for help in German. His blood pooled on the ground, spreading in a dark stain that looked black in the afternoon sun. The second medic made his choice. He ran forward, crouching low, trying to present a smaller target. Maybe he thought speed would save him. Maybe he thought his Red Cross would protect him. Maybe he simply could not listen to another human being scream in agony without trying to help. Tommy's second shot was as precise as the first. The medic collapsed 5 feet from the wounded officer. The remaining Germans understood now. Helping the wounded meant death. The invisible shooter would kill anyone who tried. The officer continued to scream, continued to beg, but his men pressed themselves against the trucks and did nothing. After 10 minutes, the officer's screams weakened. After 20, they stopped. He bled out on the road while his soldiers watched, paralyzed by fear and the terrible understanding that compassion had become a fatal weakness. The convoy eventually retreated, abandoning the dead and the dying. Mission accomplished. 1 officer dead, 2 medics dead, and 40 soldiers psychologically shattered, carrying the knowledge that their leaders would sacrifice them and that helping each other was suicide. Billy and Tommy extracted without incident. They crawled off the ridge, moved through the same fields they had used for approach, and reached Canadian lines as the sun set. The debriefing was brief. Mission success. High-value target eliminated. Enemy morale damaged. Textbook execution. That night, Billy could not stop his hands from shaking. He sat in the dugout they used as a billet, staring at his rifle, and tried to understand what he had become. He had used a wounded man as bait. He had listened to that man scream for 20 minutes while he bled to death. Tommy sat across from him, eating cold rations with mechanical efficiency. His hands were steady. His expression was neutral. "You all right?" Tommy asked around a mouthful of tinned beef. "No," Billy said quietly. "I'm not all right. It was a clean operation. We did the job. We shot medics, Tommy. We let a man bleed to death while we watched." Tommy set down his rations and looked at Billy with something that might have been pity. "We're at war. There's no such thing as murder in war. There's only killing the enemy before the enemy kills us." Those medics weren't killing anyone. Those medics would have patched up soldiers who would have killed Canadians tomorrow. Don't pretend there's a difference. Billy wanted to argue, wanted to explain that there had to be lines, had to be limits, had to be something that separated soldiers from monsters, but the words would not come because he was not sure he believed them anymore. He had crossed too many lines. He had killed too many people. "I saw the patrol," Billy said suddenly. The words came out in a rush like poison that had been building up and finally erupted. "Before your second shot, I saw them moving into the kill zone. I knew they were ours, and I didn't warn you in time." Tommy froze. His eyes locked on Billy's face. "What are you talking about?" "During the convoy mission, right before you took the second shot, Canadian Reconnaissance Patrol stumbled into your sight line. I saw them in my peripheral. I opened my mouth to call ceasefire, but you were already committed. Your finger was already pulling the trigger, and I was too slow." The silence that followed was suffocating. Tommy's face had gone completely blank, all expression erased. "The second medic wasn't a medic," Billy continued, his voice hollow. "It was Corporal James McKay, 3rd Division Reconnaissance, 22 years old, from Prince Edward Island, and I let you shoot him because I hesitated for half a second." Tommy stood slowly. "You're lying." "I wish I was. McKay's in the field hospital right now, paralyzed from the waist down. Bullet severed his spine. He'll never walk again." "That's impossible. I saw the Red Cross armband." "You Canadian Reconnaissance sometimes wear them for identification in confused sectors, and we were so focused on watching Germans that we didn't clear our background, didn't check for friendly patrols. We just shot." The implications crashed over Tommy like a wave. He had killed Canadians before. Everyone in the sniper corps knew it happened. Friendly fire was inevitable in the chaos of modern war, but those were accidents of distance and confusion. This was different. This was a result of tunnel vision, of being so focused on killing that you stopped seeing anything except targets. "You should have called ceasefire earlier," Tommy said, his voice tight. "I know. You should have been watching the background. I know. Then why didn't you?" Billy met his partner's eyes. "Because I was afraid you'd take the shot anyway, because you've stopped checking. You just kill whatever appears in your scope, and I didn't trust you to stop even if I told you to." Tommy's hand moved to his sidearm. For a moment, Billy thought his partner might actually shoot him. The rage in Tommy's eyes was incandescent, but then it faded, replaced by something worse, a kind of cold understanding. "You think I'm a monster," Tommy said flatly. "I think we're both becoming monsters. I'm just fighting it harder than you are." Tommy turned away and walked to the dugout entrance. He stood there silhouetted against the fading daylight, his back rigid with tension. "McKay's alive," Tommy said finally. "That's more than we can say for the 76 Germans I've killed. He gets to go home. He gets to see his family. He's one of the lucky ones." "He's paralyzed, Tommy. He's breathing. In this war that makes him lucky." Tommy left without another word. Billy sat alone in the dugout as darkness fell, staring at his rifle, and wondered if there was any way back from what they had become. The next morning, Billy visited McKay in the field hospital. The young corporal was sedated, his lower body immobilized by the kind of injuries that modern medicine could not fix. He would live. The doctor said he would go home. He would never walk again. McKay was awake when Billy arrived. His eyes tracked movement but showed no recognition through the morphine haze. "James," Billy said quietly. "It's Billy. Billy Mackenzie." Recognition flickered. "Billy, hey." The words were slurred. "Heard you got the convoy. Good work." "James, I need to tell you something." "Already know." McKay's smile was crooked drugged. "Was friendly fire. Lieutenant told me. Said it happens. Said I shouldn't blame anyone. It was my fault. I should have called ceasefire earlier." "Nah, my fault. Shouldn't have wandered into a kill zone." McKay's eyes were starting to close, the morphine pulling him back under. "Knew the risks. We all know the risks. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just keep the others alive. That's the job now. Keep them alive." McKay slipped back into unconsciousness. Billy sat beside the bed for an hour, watching a man he had helped cripple breathe in the slow rhythm of drugged sleep. The Canadian First Army continued its push toward Falaise. The pocket closed. Thousands of German soldiers were trapped and killed in what would later be called one of the greatest Allied tactical victories of the war. The cost in German lives was catastrophic. The cost in Canadian lives was acceptable by the brutal mathematics of military success. Billy Mackenzie and Tommy Borden continued their partnership because the Army did not care about their psychological states. They were effective, they produced results, but they no longer spoke except to coordinate targets. They no longer shared meals. They moved through the mechanics of their trade with professional efficiency and personal distance. In early September, the Canadian Army began preparations for the next phase of operations, liberation of the Channel ports, clearing the Scheldt estuary to open the approaches to Antwerp, fighting through terrain that military planners knew would be a nightmare of flooded polders, narrow dikes, and limited cover, perfect conditions for snipers. Billy was reassigned, not a transfer, not officially, just a temporary redeployment to training duties in Antwerp. New snipers needed instruction. Someone had to teach the techniques. Someone who had survived long enough to know what worked. It was a reprieve, a chance to step back from the killing. Billy accepted the assignment with gratitude. He did not speak aloud. Tommy continued forward with the advance units. His skills were too valuable to waste on training duties. He was sent to the Scheldt, to the flooded hell where men fought in waist-deep water and died from hypothermia as often as from bullets. Their partnership ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a simple administrative reassignment. Two men who had killed alongside each other for months, separated by military logistics. The night before Billy left for Antwerp, he wrote a letter to his younger brother. He wrote about the importance of staying away from specialized roles, about the value of remaining with your infantry company where the death was loud and communal rather than silent and solitary, about how killing changes you in ways that peace cannot fix. He never sent the letter. Some truths are too heavy to share. Instead, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket next to his heart. 300 miles to the north, Tommy Borden cleaned his rifle and prepared for the Scheldt campaign with the same methodical focus he brought to everything. If he felt anything about Billy's departure, he did not show it. He simply prepared for the next hunt, because hunting was all he knew now. Hunting was all he was. November 1944, the Scheldt estuary. A landscape that God himself seemed to have abandoned. The Netherlands in winter is a study in gray. Gray sky pressing down like a coffin lid. Gray water filling every depression, every crater, every trench. Gray mud that sucks at boots and drags men down into cold earth that tastes of salt and death. The Germans had flooded the polders, deliberately turning farmland into a shallow sea that offered no cover, no concealment, only exposure and hypothermia. This was where Tommy Borden thrived. The conditions that broke other men, that sent soldiers to field hospitals with trench foot and pneumonia, that reduced hardened veterans to shivering wrecks, these conditions made Tommy feel alive in ways that normal warfare no longer could. The challenge of it, the impossibility of making accurate shots when standing in freezing water, the ballistic nightmare of heavy humid air that made every bullet drop unpredictable. He had been in the Scheldt for 3 weeks. His confirmed kill count had reached 91. The number would have been higher, but he had stopped taking shots that were merely difficult. Now he only fired when the shot seemed impossible, when the conditions were wrong, when the range was too far, when any reasonable sniper would have waited for a better opportunity. Those were the only shots that made him feel anything anymore. Intelligence reports from captured German prisoners mentioned him specifically. Der Dämon im Wasser, the demon in the water, German soldiers refused to hold certain positions because they knew the demon was watching. Officers removed their rank insignia, radio men hid their equipment, machine gunners abandoned perfectly good defensive positions rather than risk becoming the demon's next target. Tommy had become exactly what the Canadian Army wanted, a psychological weapon more effective than artillery, a single man who could paralyze an entire company through fear alone. But effectiveness came with a price that Tommy was only beginning to understand. He had stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time. When he closed his eyes, he saw faces, not the faces of the men he had killed. Those had stopped bothering him months ago. Instead, he saw his own face. Or rather, he saw the absence where his face should be, just a blank space. A void in the shape of a human being. He had stopped writing letters home. What would he say? How could he explain what he had become to a family that remembered a farm boy from Manitoba who liked to hunt rabbits and play baseball with his cousins? That person no longer existed. On a gray morning that looked identical to every other gray morning, in the Skelt Tommy was assigned a new spotter, a young corporal named Davies from Ontario, 20 years old, eager, nervous. He had heard the stories about Tommy Borden and was clearly uncertain whether to be awed or terrified. They were tasked with clearing a German defensive position on a dike that controlled access to Walcheren Island. Intelligence indicated a reinforced squad, maybe 12 to 15 men with at least one officer and multiple NCOs. Standard sniper elimination mission. Disrupt the command structure before the main Canadian assault. Tommy and Davies moved into position before dawn, crawling through water that was cold enough to steal the warmth from your body in minutes. They established their hide behind the wreckage of a destroyed farm cart partially submerged, offering minimal cover but a clear sight line to the German position 800 yards distant. How do you stay warm? Davies whispered, his teeth already chattering. You don't, Tommy replied. You just accept being cold. It's easier that way. As the sun rose, revealing the German position in pale morning light, Tommy began his work. Through his scope, he identified targets with Mechanical Efficiency Officer, NCO. NC. Radio man, machine gun team leader. He assigned each a priority number and began calculating shots. The first German to die was a sergeant organizing his men for the morning stand 2. The range was 840 yards. Wind was gusting from the northwest at approximately 12 miles per hour. The cold air was dense, which would affect bullet trajectory. Tommy made the calculations automatically. The mathematics of death as natural to him now as breathing. He fired. The sergeant dropped. The remaining Germans dove for cover exactly as Tommy knew they would. Target 2, Tommy said calmly. Officer, northwest corner of the position. He'll try to restore order. Wait for it. Davies watched through his spotting scope, amazed at Tommy's certainty. Sure enough, 30 seconds later, a German lieutenant rose from cover, shouting orders, trying to rally his men. Tommy's second shot was as precise as the first. The officer fell mid-sentence. Target 3, radio man. He's going to try to call for artillery support. Southeast position behind the sandbags. Again, Tommy's prediction was perfect. The radio man rose just enough to speak into his handset. Tommy's bullet found him before he could transmit a single word. This continued for 2 hours. Tommy calling targets before they appeared, firing shots that seemed ballistically impossible, turning the German position into a killing ground where movement meant death. Davies stopped counting after the 8th kill. He simply watched, horrified and fascinated, as Tommy Borden demonstrated why the Germans called him a demon. But something was wrong. Davies could sense it, even if he could not articulate what it was. Tommy was taking too long between shots, letting targets appear and then waiting, watching them move, studying their fear before finally pulling the trigger. We could extract, Davies suggested after the 10th kill. Mission accomplished. Command structure eliminated. Not yet, Tommy said quietly. There's still the squad leader, older guy, experienced. He's keeping them together. I want him. Why the position is finished, their combat ineffective. Tommy turned to look at his spotter, and Davies saw something in those eyes that made him want to crawl away through the freezing water and never look back. Because he's the best one. Because killing him will be the hardest shot, because that's the only thing that matters anymore. Davies said nothing. What could he say? He was watching a man who had gone somewhere beyond war, beyond duty, beyond anything that could be called human purpose. The German squad leader finally appeared, an older soldier, maybe 40, with the kind of face that spoke of too many battles survived. He was trying to organize a retreat, getting his remaining men ready to abandon the position under covering fire. The range was now over 900 yards. The wind had picked up. Rain had started to fall, creating vertical currents that would play havoc with bullet trajectory. Any reasonable sniper would have let them go. The position was neutralized. The mission was accomplished. Tommy took the shot. The German squad leader fell, and the remaining soldiers broke completely. They ran splashing through water, abandoning weapons and equipment, no longer a military unit, but simply terrified men fleeing from death that struck from nowhere. 12 confirmed, Davies said, his voice hollow. That's got to be some kind of record. Tommy said nothing. He was staring through his scope at the bodies floating in the gray water, and his expression was completely blank. They extracted back to Canadian lines. Davies filed his report stating the facts without editorial comment, because what could he say that would not sound like madness or accusation? Tommy Borden was the most effective sniper in the Canadian Army. He was also something that Davies did not have words for. That night alone in a cellar that served as temporary quarters, Tommy experienced something he had not felt in months. He felt afraid, not of the Germans, not of death, but of the realization that he could not remember what it felt like to care about anything except the next shot. He could not remember the last time he had thought about home, about family, about any kind of future beyond tomorrow's hunt. He tried to sleep and could not. He tried to read a letter from his mother that had arrived 3 weeks ago and could not make it past the first paragraph. The words described a world that felt completely alien, a world where people worried about harvest yields and church socials and whether the youngest Borden boy would marry the Peterson girl. That world had nothing to do with Tommy Borden. That world was for people, and Tommy was beginning to understand that he was no longer a person. He was a function, a weapon that walked and talked and occasionally remembered to eat. 300 miles south in Antwerp, Billy Mackenzie was teaching new sniper recruits the fundamentals of fieldcraft, how to construct a ghillie suit, how to calculate range and windage, how to control your breathing and your heartbeat, the technical skills that he could transmit without having to discuss what using those skills would cost them. But the recruits had questions. They always had questions. "How many have you killed?" a young private asked one afternoon. The question was innocent, asked with the kind of morbid curiosity that soldiers always had about combat veterans. Billy considered lying. The number was 56 now, not counting the church tower boy or the friendly fire incident that would haunt him forever. But lying felt wrong somehow. These boys deserved to know what they were volunteering for. 56 confirmed, Billy said quietly, but confirmation doesn't mean much. "I've fired at many more. Some of those men probably died without anyone to verify it. Do you remember them?" another recruit asked. Billy looked at the young faces staring at him, waiting for wisdom or reassurance or some kind of validation that what they were about to do was acceptable. He wanted to tell them comforting lies. He wanted to say that you forget, that it gets easier, that the dead stop haunting you. Instead, he told them the truth. "I remember every single one. The ones I know I killed, and the ones I think I killed, and the ones I'm not sure about. They're all there every night waiting for me when I try to sleep. And the worst part is not remembering the enemies. The worst part is remembering the one who wasn't an enemy at all." The cellar went silent. Billy had said too much, revealed too much, but he was tired of pretending that what they did was glorious or noble or anything except necessary evil that marked you forever. "If you have any other options," Billy continued, his voice steady, "take them. Infantry is dangerous, but you die with your brothers and you know who you're killing and why. Sniping is different. Sniping is solitary and silent, and it changes you in ways that you won't recognize until it's too late to go back." He was officially reprimanded for that speech, accused of damaging morale, undermining the sniper program, but the reprimand came with a private conversation with a lieutenant colonel who had served in the First World War. "I know what you're going through," the colonel said quietly. "I was a sniper in the trenches, killed 43 Germans that I know of. That was 26 years ago, and I still see their faces, still wonder about their families, still wake up some nights convinced I'm back in that mud looking through a scope." "Does it get better?" Billy asked. "No, but you learn to carry it. You learn to build a life around the weight. And you hope that what you did mattered, that the men you saved by killing the enemy justify the cost to your soul." Billy had no response to that. He simply nodded and returned to training recruits, teaching them how to kill from a distance while silently hoping that each one would fail the psychological evaluation and be reassigned to regular infantry. In early December, Billy received a letter from his father. His younger brother had enlisted and was preparing to ship out to Europe. The letter was full of pride and worry in equal measure. His father asked if Billy could look out for his brother when he arrived, keep him safe if possible. Billy read the letter 3 times and then carefully composed a response. He lied. He said everything was fine. He said the war was going well. He said his brother would be safe because the Allies were winning and the German army was collapsing. Then he wrote a second letter that he did not send, a letter that told the truth, that begged his brother to refuse sniper training if it was offered. That explained how killing in silence was different from killing in battle. That described the special kind of isolation that came from being good at something that destroyed your humanity with every application of that skill. He folded the unsent letter and placed it with the other unsent letters he had written to his brother over the past months, confessions and warnings that would never be read. Christmas 1944 came and went with little celebration. The Battle of the Bulge was raging to the South Germany's desperate final counteroffensive, throwing the Allied advance into chaos. Canadian forces in the Scheldt continued their grinding battle against German defenders who knew they were fighting for time rather than victory. Tommy Borden spent Christmas Day in a flooded trench watching a German position through his scope, waiting for targets. He killed 3 men that day, 1 officer and 2 NCOs. The rest of the German unit surrendered by evening, broken by the psychological pressure of knowing the demon was watching. Tommy felt nothing about the kills. He felt nothing about Christmas. He felt nothing at all except a distant curiosity about when he had stopped being able to feel and whether that absence was permanent or just a temporary adaptation to war. In late January 1945, the Canadian Army began planning the final operations that would carry them across the Rhine and into Germany itself. The war was entering its endgame. Berlin was burning. The German army was collapsing. Victory was no longer a question of if but when. Billy Mackenzie received orders recalling him to active combat duty. The push into Germany would require every experienced soldier, and training duty was a luxury the army could no longer afford. He would be reassigned to his original unit and resume sniper operations for the final campaigns. He received the orders with numb acceptance. He had known this was coming, had known that his reprieve was temporary, but some part of him had hoped that maybe the war would end before he had to return to the killing. The night before he left Antwerp, Billy sat in a church that had been partially destroyed by bombing. The roof was open to the winter sky. Snow drifted through the broken timbers. The altar was cracked but still standing, and someone had placed a makeshift cross there, 2 pieces of burned wood bound together with wire. Billy had not prayed since Sicily, had not felt capable of approaching God with hands as bloodstained as his. But tonight in the ruined church, he knelt in the snow and tried to remember the words. He could not remember formal prayers, could not recall the Latin phrases from his childhood, so instead he simply spoke from the wreckage of his heart. I don't know if you're listening. I don't know if you can forgive what I've done. But if there's any part of me left that's worth saving, please help me hold on to it. Help me get through what's coming without losing whatever humanity I have left. And if I can't do that, if the killing finally takes everything, then please just let it be quick. Don't let me become like Tommy. Don't let me love it. The church offered no answers. The snow continued to fall, and Billy Mackenzie stood, brushed the snow from his knees, and prepared to return to the work of killing. March 1945, the Rhine crossing, the final barrier between the Allies and the heart of Germany. The river was wide and fast-flowing, defended by the remnants of the Wehrmacht who knew that surrender now meant facing judgment for everything the Reich had done. Billy and Tommy were reunited for the operation, not by choice but by military logistics. The most experienced sniper teams were needed for a critical mission. A German colonel named Klaus von Ritter was coordinating the defense of Wiesel, a key crossing point. Intelligence indicated that von Ritter was a brilliant tactician, a veteran of the Eastern Front, who had successfully delayed Soviet advances through superior defensive planning. If von Ritter lived, the Rhine crossing would cost thousands of Allied lives. If he died, the German defense would likely collapse into confusion. The mission was simple in concept and suicidal in execution. Cross the Rhine at night, infiltrate 2 kilometers behind German lines, eliminate von Ritter, extract under covering artillery fire. The briefing officer did not mention that extraction was optimistic. Everyone in the room understood that this was likely a one-way mission, but the math was clear. 2 snipers versus thousands of Allied lives. Billy and Tommy had not spoken since September, 5 months of silence and distance. When they met at the staging area for the mission, they regarded each other with the wariness of men who had once been close and were now strangers. "You look terrible," Tommy said finally. "You look worse," Billy replied. It was true. Tommy had lost weight he could not afford to lose. His eyes had sunken into his skull, giving him the appearance of a death mask. His hands trembled slightly until he gripped his rifle, and then they steadied with the familiar weight. 94 confirmed, Tommy said, answering a question Billy had not asked. "You, 58. I've been on training duty." "Lucky you." They prepared in silence, each conducting the familiar rituals that preceded every mission. Checking equipment, loading magazines, applying camouflage. The movements were automatic muscle memory built over months of repetition. As they prepared to board the assault boat that would ferry them across the Rhine under cover of darkness, Billy spoke quietly. "If something happens to me out there, tell my family I was trying to do the right thing. Tell them I never stopped fighting to stay human." Tommy looked at him for a long moment. "And if something happens to me, I'll tell them you were the best at what you did, that you saved Allied lives, that you mattered." It was not the whole truth, but it was a truth that families could live with. They crossed the Rhine in darkness, hunched in a small boat with a muffled motor, praying that German sentries would not hear the engine or spot their silhouette against the water. Artillery thundered in the distance, the preparatory barrage for the main crossing that would come at dawn. The sound covered their approach, and they reached the eastern bank without incident. The infiltration was a nightmare of tension and precision. Every step through German territory was measured and careful. They passed within feet of enemy positions, invisible in their ghillie suits, and the darkness hearts pounding but breathing controlled. It took them 18 hours to cover 2 kilometers, 18 hours of crawling through mud and fear and the certain knowledge that discovery meant death. But they made it. They established position in the ruins of a factory overlooking von Ritter's headquarters with enough time to prepare for the dawn shot. They lay side by side in the wreckage waiting for light, and for the first time in months they talked, really talked, about home, about who they had been before the war, about the impossibility of going back to that innocence. Do you think we can ever be normal again? Billy asked. Tommy was silent for a long time. No, he finally said. Normal people don't do what we do. Normal people don't get good at killing. We crossed a line, Billy. Maybe you earlier than me, or maybe me earlier than you, but we both crossed it. And there's no going back. Then what do we do after? I don't think there is an after. Not for us. I think this is all we are now. Dawn came slowly, gray light revealing the headquarters building and the men moving around it, German soldiers preparing for the day's defense, officers conferring, the machinery of war grinding forward. Through his scope, Billy identified von Ritter, tall, distinguished gray-haired, the kind of man who looked like a general from a history book. He was standing outside the headquarters, studying maps with his staff pointing at defensive positions. The range was 830 yards, wind was moderate, conditions were as good as they would get. Both snipers had a clean shot. Then a young German officer emerged from the headquarters, lieutenant's insignia, smooth-faced, no older than 20. He stood next to von Ritter, taking notes, clearly an aide or adjutant. Billy's crosshairs drifted from von Ritter to the young lieutenant and back. The young officer looked so much like the boy in the church tower, the same innocent face, the same youth that had not yet been hardened by war. Billy's hands began to shake, the scope wavered, he could not steady his breathing, could not find the calm place that he needed to make the shot. I can't, Billy whispered, I can't do it. Tommy shifted slightly, acquiring the target in his own scope. Then I will. No! Billy's voice was sharp. If you take this shot, you'll never stop. This is the last mission, Tommy. After this, we go home. After this, we have to find a way to be human again, and I don't think you can do that if you keep killing. Then what do? The mission fails. Billy forced himself to breathe, forced himself to center the scope, forced himself to remember why they were here. Von Ritter would kill thousands of Allied soldiers if he lived. The young lieutenant standing next to him was not the church tower boy. He was a German officer in an active combat zone, and Billy was a soldier with a job to do. I'll take it, Billy said. But only Von Ritter, the boy, lives. He adjusted his aim back to the colonel, found the stillness that had eluded him moments before, remembered his father's words about respecting the life you take, about the clean kill. He fired. Von Ritter dropped. The young lieutenant dove for cover unharmed. The German headquarters erupted in chaos. Tommy and Billy were already moving, crawling backward, racing for the extraction point as pre-planned artillery began to fall. They ran through enemy territory in daylight, the most dangerous thing a sniper could do, but they had no choice. The mission was complete. Now they just had to survive. They almost made it. A German patrol spotted them 500 yards from the Rhine, 8 soldiers, weapons ready, shouting for them to halt. Billy and Tommy ran zigzagging, using every scrap of cover. Behind them, rifle fire cracked, bullets kicked up dirt around their boots. They reached a destroyed barn dove behind what was left of a stone wall. The German patrol was closing, 3 minutes, maybe 4, before they would be overrun. Go, Tommy said. He was checking his magazine, preparing for a last stand. We both go, Billy replied. Don't be stupid. You have a brother to teach, a life to live. I have nothing but this. Before Billy could argue, Tommy shoved him hard, using his full body weight to knock Billy off balance. By the time Billy recovered, Tommy had fixed his bayonet and was preparing to hold the position. Tell them it meant something, Tommy said. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. Tell them I wasn't just good at killing. Tell them I was a soldier. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 German soldiers dropped. The remaining 5 scattered looking for cover. And in that moment of confusion, Billy ran. He ran because Tommy had ordered him to. He ran because staying would make Tommy's sacrifice meaningless. Behind him, he heard more shots, heard Tommy's rifle fall silent, heard the distinctive sound of bayonet combat, heard a scream that might have been German or might have been Tommy or might have been both. Billy reached Canadian lines 30 minutes later, collapsing across the wire with shrapnel wounds and hypothermia. Medics dragged him to safety. He tried to tell them about Tommy tried to organize a rescue, but the German positions were too strong. By the time a rescue could be mounted, the area was empty except for bodies. Tommy Borden was listed as missing in action, presumed killed in action. His rifle was never recovered. His body was never found. He simply vanished into the chaos of the war's final weeks. Billy Mackenzie spent 3 weeks in a field hospital when he was released. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. It was May 1945, and the killing had finally stopped. Billy received the Silver Star for the Von Ritter mission. He attended ceremonies where generals shook his hand and called him a hero. He smiled at the appropriate moments and said the appropriate words and felt absolutely nothing except the crushing weight of everything he had done and everything he had lost. He returned to Cape Breton in October 1945. His father met him at the dock. His brother was there too, having survived the war as an infantry rifleman, cheerful and unchanged in all the ways that Billy was altered beyond recognition. His father took one look at Billy's face and asked no questions about the war. Some wounds are too visible to require explanation. Billy tried to resume his life. He worked his father's trap lines, he attended church, he spoke when spoken to, but everyone could see that William Mackenzie had left something essential on the battlefields of Europe. He moved through the world like something only partially present. In December 1945, a letter arrived from the War Office. Tommy Borden's status had been updated. German POW records indicated he had survived the Rhine crossing engagement. He had been captured after ammunition ran out after fighting with a bayonet until overpowered by numbers. He had died in a POW camp in late March 1945, weeks before Germany surrendered. Cause of death was listed as pneumonia, but the camp doctor had added a note to the file. Patient refused treatment, lost will to live. Tommy's last words to the doctor were included in the report. I couldn't stop hunting. I had to make the war stop me. Billy read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the box where he kept his unsent letters to his brother. He did not cry. He had no tears left. He simply sat in the cold November darkness and understood that Tommy had found the only peace available to men like them. Not survival, but an ending. 5 years later, in autumn of 1950, Billy received an unexpected visitor, an older German man standing at his cabin door, holding a box wrapped in brown paper. Herr Mackenzie? The man asked in heavily accented English. Corporal William Mackenzie. Just Billy now. Who are you? My name is Klaus Zimmermann. I was a soldier in the 12th SS Panzer Division. I believe you tried to kill me several times in Normandy. Billy stared at this stranger who had traveled across an ocean to find him. Why are you here? Zimmermann held out the box. Because you let me live, and I needed to understand why. They sat in Billy's cabin as cold rain drummed on the roof. Zimmermann opened the box and withdrew a stack of photographs. 47 faces, German soldiers, all dead, all killed in the sectors where Billy had operated. These are the men from my regiment who died to Canadian snipers, Zimmermann explained. I collected their photographs after the war. I wanted to remember them. But I also wanted to understand the men who killed them. Why? Because I had children after the war, 3 daughters. And I realized that I only had those children because someone chose not to kill me. In Walcheren Island, November 1944, my squad was surrounded. We tried to surrender. A Canadian sniper had us in his sights. I know he did, but he let us live. He could have killed all 12 of us. Instead, he let us surrender and carry the fear home to the rest of the German army. That was Tommy, Billy said quietly. Tommy Borden, my partner. I would like to thank him. He's dead, died in a POW camp, March 1945. Zimmermann was silent for a long moment. Then I will thank you. You and Herr Borden gave me my life. You gave my daughters their father. You gave my grandchildren their grandfather. The fear you created, it was terrible, but it was also mercy. You made us afraid enough to surrender instead of fight to the death. You saved German lives by making us understand we could not win. Billy had never thought of it that way, had never considered that the psychological warfare, the terror they inflicted, might have shortened battles and reduced casualties on both sides. It did not erase the weight, did not absolve the guilt, but it provided something he had not had in 5 years. Context, purpose beyond pure killing. Tommy would have liked to hear that, Billy said. He died thinking he was just a monster, that all he was good for was killing. Zimmermann reached into the box again and withdrew a photograph of himself with 3 young girls and a woman, his family. This is what he died for. This is what you both fought for. The chance for families to exist. For children to grow up without war. That is not nothing, Herr Mackenzie. That is everything. After Zimmermann left, Billy sat alone in his cabin. For the first time since returning from the war, he allowed himself to feel something other than guilt. Not happiness, not peace, but something like understanding. The terrible things he and Tommy had done served a purpose larger than the killing itself. He would never be whole again, but perhaps he could carry the weight differently now, not as pure guilt, but as the cost of something that mattered. Billy Mackenzie lived to be 82 years old. He never spoke publicly about his service as a sniper. He trained Canadian military snipers in the 1960s, teaching technique, but always emphasizing the psychological cost. He advocated for veteran mental health services decades before it was fashionable. He married, had a daughter, and told her nothing about the war until she was 30. His final words, whispered in a hospital bed in 2003, were simple. Tell Tommy I kept the promise. I stayed human. Tommy Borden has no known grave. He is listed among the missing, a name on a monument to those who vanished in the war's final chaos, but his legacy endures in every Canadian sniper who learns that The hardest shot to take is sometimes the shot you choose not to fire. They were hunters from the wilderness who brought their skills to the battlefields of Europe. One came home broken but breathing. The other stayed in the fog forever. And in the silence that followed the war, in the decades of peace purchased with their humanity, their story became what all war stories eventually become: a warning, a memorial, and a reminder that the men who kill in silence pay a price that peace can never fully repay. Geister im Nebel, ghosts in the fog, that is what the Germans called them. But the Canadians who served alongside them knew a different truth. They were not ghosts. They were men who became ghosts, men who crossed into shadow to do the necessary terrible things, men who never fully emerged back into the light. And if you listen carefully on cold November mornings when the fog rolls in from the ocean, you might hear the echo of that truth, the weight of numbers counted and never forgotten, the sound of humanity slowly eroding under the pressure of war's demands: 58 confirmed kills, 94 confirmed kills, numbers that defined them and destroyed them, numbers written in blood and memory, and the terrible understanding that some costs can only be paid with the irreplaceable currency of the soul. They were the best at what they did, and what they did never forgave them for being so good at it. That is the final truth. Not that they killed without remorse, but that they killed until remorse was all they had left. The war ended. But in the silence that followed, men like Billy Mackenzie spent the rest of their lives learning to live with shadows that never quite lifted. This is their story. Remember it, honor it, and pray you never have to understand what it cost them to become the weapons their country needed.